Okay, welcome back, all of you who are back, and hello and welcome to those of you who are new. Some of you I don't recognize, either it's because you're new or because you've aged, and as is inevitable, and so you're not what you were 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago. When did we stop? About 5 or 6 weeks ago for the break. So we're going to continue tonight into the Sixth Patriarch Dharma Jewel Platform Sutra. And last class, we just finished up on page 21, which is the end of the first chapter. And tonight we'll start into the second chapter entitled Prajna. And do our best to try to unpack this. Partly what we're doing in this exercise is looking at this text to try to understand some of the basic teachings in Dharma, but at the same time interpreting them or getting into them in such a way as they can come alive and speak to our own understanding, our own lives, and our own practice now. So partly it's to look at the technical terms and the concepts here, but also to pull out the continuing relevance. So my approach to this is, particularly this text, is it's timeless in a sense that it just never ceases to lose its purchase. But it's also timely in that it's completely current, because it's talking about something that's very fundamental in the human mind, and not something that is subject to a kind of conditioning of time or even place. So, just to finish up, maybe we'll do a transition. Let's look at page 21. Those of you who have been following it, at this point, he just finished his first formal Dharma assembly at this monastery called East Mountain. And it's the first time he's formally taught. It's actually the same place now that he takes the full precepts and becomes ordained and fully becomes a Buddhist monk. And he's talking to a mixed assembly of at that time, sort of the spectrum of society, which included religious people from Buddhist background, monks and nuns and lay people, but also Taoist people who were in the Confucian persuasion, and if you know Chinese religion, people from all over the map, because there's just a lot of religious, spiritual diversity on a spectrum from things that would make your hair stand on end to stuff that's very rational and reasonable and everything in between. And they were all there. And then apparently some officials were there too. And according to this text, Prefect Wei, who is asking these questions, is in fact something like a local governor. So he's unofficial, but he's also a cultivator or trying to be a cultivator. So on page 21, the master says, and this is a very interesting passing, this teaching, meaning the teaching that I've given you and I'm going to give you, has been passed down from the sages of the past. It is not my own wisdom. You who wish to comprehend the teachings of the past sages should just purify your minds. After listening to this or it, cast aside your doubts, and you will be no different from the sages of generations past. Delighted with what they heard, the whole assembly bowed and withdrew. So this ends the formal discourse. A couple things I note, everybody sees different things in the text, is first he doesn't make the claim that this is something that's unique to him or that he invented. He's merely passing along a wisdom. So he's not inventing it, he's merely rediscovering it. And so his source, so to speak, is the same source that all Buddhas and all sages come from. It's this awakened mind, and it's not tied even to someone who came before him, although he gets certified by his master, the fifth patriarch, the fifth patriarch would say the same thing. It's not mine, I'm just passing along. So there's a sense of universal ownership, if you will, rather than particular ownership. And this moves away from this being, therefore, even a sect. And I would say maybe not even, quote, a religion, because he's saying it's a wisdom that's passed along. It's universally available. He says it's sagely, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily, quote, Buddhist. And it's available to everyone. He says, after hearing this teaching, if you really want to understand the teaching of past sages, purify your minds. It's a very interesting comment here. He's not saying you need to study extensively. You don't need even to believe necessarily what I'm saying to you, but you need to purify your mind and affirm and discover it for yourself. So the method he's giving is the cleansing, the rectification, the balancing and centering of the human mind that will then lead to the same discovery that he's had. And then he says something interesting. He says, after listening to this, cast aside your doubts, and you will be no different from the sages of the generations past. So he's interesting. He's pointing to two things. One, he's telling them to look within, to discover this truth within their own nature, within their own minds, through a process of purity. And we'll go into this more, what this means, but it's a method of self-cultivation. And involves utmost sincerity, a real close observation of one's thoughts, feelings, emotions, habits, to square those and free them up from confusion and so forth. But then he says, also you need to, when you get this, don't be crippled by doubt. So this is the second part. There has to be some, I won't say faith here, but you have to have some belief in something in order to bring this forward. And usually, it's complex because in many teachings, doubt is seen as an obstacle to being correct or being right or being solid. That doubt obstructs spiritual practice. But in this teaching, they make a distinction between constructive doubt, let's say, and destructive doubt. And in some cases, doubt is not only not an impediment to understanding, it's absolutely necessary for understanding. So this is where it becomes important. The destructive doubt, if we go this way, would be to really doubt that you have this ability, this innate ability to realize this, to doubt the very premise, which is what he says, look within, you have it, it's available to you. If you do indeed doubt this, you won't be able to then run the experiment because you'll constantly be second-guessing and lacking confidence in yourself. So it doesn't mean hubris, it doesn't mean overweening pride, it means just a basic confidence that I too can realize this immense potential, even though I haven't yet, and I haven't tapped into it. I have it available to me. That is a kind of hypothetical confidence that you start with, and then it's confirmed by your realization. It's not in place of cultivation, but it's realized through cultivation, and then that faith or confidence becomes knowledge, jhana or prajna. In other words, it becomes a tool. So faith or confidence is a means to this end, but it's not the end. It's not sufficient, but it's necessary. Okay? So this is the destructive doubt is to doubt yourself, and then, of course, to doubt these teachings or the method, because if you doubt either one of those, you won't be able to step outside the box. You'll be paralyzed. But again, I want to point out that although these are destructive, this kind of confidence in the teachings and in yourself is, once again, necessary to do this, but not sufficient. You can't just stop there and say, I believe I have the Buddha nature, and I believe in the Dharma. Yeah, it's like saying, I believe in food, and I believe it tastes good. So what? You know, until you eat it and confirm that for yourself, it's still abstract, it's still hypothetical. So again, when the texts say, confidence or shraddha, faith, is the source of the way, it means it's the source of the way. It's not the complete way. It's just the beginning of the way. So this is the confidence that you need. So that's the destructive doubt that stands in the way. The constructive doubt, you're thinking, well, what does that mean? Constructive doubt means having doubt in matters that are doubtful. In other words, from the Buddha's point of view, that the whole nature of the way we perceive in an unawakened state, reality, is something we need to start doubting. I am permanent, I'm eternal, I'm the center of the universe, all things revolve around me. You should probably doubt that. It is what that chasing after fame and success and sort of hedonistic pleasures will produce lasting happiness and joy. That, the Buddha said, you should probably examine a little more carefully. That acquiring wealth beyond a certain stage of sustenance will increasingly, more wealth you have, the more happy you'll become. That you will live forever in some form. These are all matters that the Buddha said you should probably doubt. So the having doubt in matters that are doubtful means basically in the technical terms, doubting the permanent substantiality of phenomena of things as being real, lasting, substantial, and oneself as being substantial, eternal, permanent, unchanging. So part of having doubt is to see things as impermanent, to see that they're passing, to see that things do not have a sort of self-existing eternal substance, but they're always in flux and changing and whatnot. And to see reality in this way could not entail doubt if you're not seeing it the opposite. In other words, if you see it that way to start with, then there's no reason to have doubt because you're seeing it really clearly. But if you don't, the Buddha is encouraging to have doubt. And he says doubt will arise when what you're holding on to does not match with things as they are. There's a crisis that occurs, and in that moment, doubt arises. What you do with that doubt can be constructive or destructive. If you use the doubt to sort of look at things, to examine, as Socrates says, examine the life, to examine one's life, it can lead to insight and liberation. If you get freaked out by the doubt and spooked, it can lead to a number of behaviors. The Buddha said one of those is a profound denial. It's a renunciation, but not the renunciation of going forth, renunciation of things as they really are. And then you get into an artificial existence that's pumped up by all kinds of supports, amusements, entertainments, diversions. And this denial of the facts of existence, the Buddha said, can seem to be an end of suffering. But ultimately, he says it's going to end up with a really big disappointment because all of these things eventually empty out, fall flat, and don't deliver, and you're then confronting impermanence and whatnot at some stage. So that's the difference between these two doubts. I don't want to go into that too much. Anybody questions? Clear about constructive, destructive doubt? Okay. Or not. Okay, so let's turn to the next chapter. It says, the following day, Prefect Wei asked for further instruction. The master ascended to the lecture seat and said to those assembled, you should all clear your minds and focus your attention on the great perfection of wisdom. In the parenthesis, we have the Sanskrit Mahaprajna Paramita. Okay, so the scene is he's not informally now answering questions or talking, but he's actually, it says he ascended the lecture seat. And I explained before, this is where the title Platform Sutra comes because he's going to the platform, the lecture podium, which is a somewhat elevated space, and sitting there and then addressing the assembly. Now, normally what happens, he's wearing his formal monastic attire. It's very common for the lecturer to come in, to bow 3 times to the Buddha, to the Dharma, the Sangha, while they're bowing to renew their vows, usually to save and liberate all living beings, to end all afflictions and so forth. and to humble themselves. The bowing is a symbol of emptying out so they can become a vessel for transmitting the Dharma. So you could see it as a ritual, of bowing to something, but it's mostly a psychodynamic exercise to empty out themselves and prepare themselves to pass on the teaching without the impediment of their own maybe shallow opinions or their own just feelings and so forth. So that's probably what he's done. Then he ascends. And again, usually what's done, the people listening, to show their sincerity, will maybe bow 3 times, and somebody might come forth with a stick of incense and circumambulate that platform 3 times, put the stick of incense in, bow 3 times, get down with folded hands on one knee, and formally request the teaching on behalf of everybody there and all living beings. This is a very standard ritual, but again, it has lots of meaning, because what they're doing with the incense is what he said in the previous, just purify your minds and accept this. So what the incense represents is a changing of the space, purification. The incense is a purifying ritual that symbolizes they're ready now to listen and receive in a different way than before. And then he confirms this. He says, you should all clear your minds. So just in case you weren't, right on with what the incense symbolizes, he's not saying the incense magically invokes all these deities that are going to, speak to you. He says, clear your minds and focus your attention. And then on what? On prajna paramita. Okay. Just a bit about prajna, and I don't claim to know very much about it, really. Prajna is a Sanskrit term, and some ways it was explained to me is that mostly in English it's translated as wisdom. So it's not just knowledge, it's not just information and knowledge, but it's something that's more, and it's a kind of direct insight into the nature of reality, into the nature of things. Now I say direct insight. It means that this is coming from a not mediated understanding of things as they really are, as opposed to learned or believed in or accepted on faith, or that you read about it or you have a hunch or whatnot. This is actually, the Buddha said, it's like seeing an apple in your palm of your hand. It's that real when you have this direct apprehension of it. So sometimes, I guess, and I hope you'll help me out here with the Sanskrit, but the way it was presented, one with jna, the J-N-A, represents this knowledge or this deeper understanding, and the pra can either be like an intensifier, meaning higher or supreme, or sometimes can mean being born or springing up from. There's 2 ways of looking at it. Any more on that?
I think it would probably more like forward,
Mm-hmm.
or you could say direct.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier knowing directly. I think that's, the nya is definitely means basically to know or understand, and the pra would be like head on. So
Everybody
to
see
know
what she's
directly.
doing? It's an interesting gesture, but this is what it means. And this is also, you cut through what's in the way.
So to know things as they are, without, like you said, any of the past karmic conditioning mediating it.
So this is good. By the way, that's Lauren, and she's our in-house Sanskritist. So if you have any questions on Sanskrit, do not ask me, ask Lauren. So prajna implies both a deep and profound understanding beyond just the appearance of things to the underlying sort of realities, but more importantly, it is accessed directly by you. So sometimes they make a distinction in the teachings, the tradition of saying there's like 3 kinds of prajna sometimes. There's a sort of prajna that is literary, and that comes from the studying of the text, and you can study them and you get a feeling for it. You have a sense of it, and It comes from a close study of these original texts. There's a second level of prajna, which is called contemplative prajna. And this is not just mere study, but it is a understanding or insight you gain when you're in or entering a state of deep meditation or contemplation. So when you still your mind and sort of remove distractions, like tonight, the first 45 minutes, in that state, you can, in that quietness, begin to see things as they really are, supported by the exercises of contemplation that remove the distractions. And so it's like you're tuning in your screen. I don't know, everybody does digital now, so let me go back to a time when to tune a radio, you turned a dial. Really? Yeah, you turned a dial, and a thing moved, and you could go, and it'd be in, and you move it left, and it'd be out. And depending on how far you're away from the signal or whatnot, you'd have to move it around. And if my grandfather was there, you had to hit it on the top and bang it, and then you tune it in, and you hear a clear signal. But if you didn't pay attention to it or somebody bumped it, it would go out of signal again. And so this is called proper concentration, so proper reception. So by meditating, in a sense, you are dialing yourself to be in tune with something else. Okay, I'm not saying you get prajna from the radio. I'm just saying it's an example. So contemplative prajna means when you still yourself and whatnot, suddenly you start to see things a little more clearly. You know, at the end of 45 minutes, you're going, yeah, I forgot. Whoa, that's right. But it's still contemplative prajna, which means it comes and goes with contemplation. So as soon as you get up, go outside again, it's gone. You say, wow. Then you go back in, you find it again in meditation, and then it's gone. Those of you who have gone to sessions can realize you can do this for 7 days. At the end of 7 days, you feel as if you're the Buddha. And everything is really clear. And then all you do is one call home, or get in the car and get out, hit the first restaurant, and prajna is gone. Like, what happened? It's truly mystical, because it mystifies. So that's contemplative. But the third kind is I don't know what the translation is. It's shirshang. It means the real thing, okay? Real mark, it's called. This is what prajna means. This is the direct prajna, the direct wisdom. And it's immediate because means not, mediated by. It's not mediated by anything else. It's not mediated by learning. It's not mediated by having to enter a trance. It's not mediated by being in a class. It is directly coming through your own, and it's 24/7, and it doesn't come and go anymore. So at all times and all places, walking, standing, sitting, even in sleep, you're in this prajna, and you see things truly as they are. So much so that it doesn't even occur to you to be confused. Confusion doesn't arise. So prajna, in a sense, is the opposite of delusion, which is our normal state. This in Sanskrit is avidya, and gets different translations. Moha is another translation. Wuming in Chinese is another translation. But I think avidya, again, means meaning not, vidya, seen. So it's not knowledge, not seeing things as they are, right? Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
So vid.
The opposite.
Vid means to...
To know usually, but to know or to find. Sometimes even to exist.
Mm-hmm.
But here it means to know. So it's not known.
The reason I like it, in the sense of the I, and in this text, when the Sixth Patriarch says, I reached this state of understanding, and the Master said to them, so what secret did you teach from your teacher? And he said, we didn't have any secrets, and nothing was transmitted. We merely talked about seeing. So even in here, jian in the Chinese, and vidya here refers to that directness. We didn't use logic and reason. We didn't have a debate over what the terms. This was not some abstract philosophical discussion. Well, I see your point, but on the other hand, no. They were like seeing things as they really were, and that's why they use seeing. So avidya means not seen. It's almost as if there's a cataract on your eyes. And many of the texts talk about avidya or as a cataract, as a simile, as a cataract that obstructs your true seeing, things as they really are. So that avidya basically is either an unwillingness or an inability to see things, to sort of see the facts of life really as they are for yourself. This is what it means. Now, an unwillingness is sort of mild in the sense that, well, it's not mild, it's actually stronger than the inability. In either case, it's a failure. But the unwillingness implies that you could, that you do have a sense, but you just sort of choose to step away from it, to go into the state of denial again. And so that unwillingness becomes a kind of denial. That's the cataract. Okay? So this is some of these terms become, and this failure to see or know, whether it's unwilling or denial, is really what the Buddha says is the cause of unhappiness, suffering, and affliction. Because we cannot get liberated through denial or through an unwillingness to see things as they really are. Now, I know someone might think, well, but if you really look at things as they are, it's kind of deplorably depressing, blah, 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 and so forth. And the Buddha said that's only because you have had the glasses on so long that you don't see clearly through them. You only see the surface of things. So there's a premise here that in seeing things as they really are, that is only the first step for liberation and true insight. It's not the end. Beyond that is something that is liberating and joyful and happy. And that's why it said, here, the marks of seeing things as they really are usually presented as anitya, dukkha, anatta, and sometimes sunyata. In other words, to see things as they really are is to recognize that they are impermanent, that there's no self-substantial thing to them, that they are therefore unsatisfactory. You cannot cling and attach to them because they float and drift away. And then the final one is sunyata and emptiness, which seems like another downer. But it's not. What's happening here is by seeing that they are empty, you are now able to experience the fullness of existence. You're actually, and there's the paradox, the fullness of existence, which they call wondrous. They say true emptiness is just wondrous existence. It's not available because of denial and the unwillingness to let go. And so in a sense, you can't enjoy it until you let go. This is somewhat paradoxical, but bottom line is, face it squarely. It's not going to change if you don't face it squarely. It's still going to be there, and it's still going to hit you in the face at some point. So if you face it squarely, at least there's an honesty and integrity to that. And you can say, okay, I'm looking at it squarely. But beyond that is I won't say the promise. That's not what he's saying. Is a understanding or a realization or an experience that isn't suffering, that isn't unhappiness, that isn't despair or disappointment. But you can't get there until you let go of what is false. My teacher used to say, you can't pick up what's true until you put down what's false. So you have to do this emptying out. And that emptiness has to do with seeing through things and letting go. And by doing that, an opening occurs to embrace something far wider and deeper. I can just say this. It's something, again, that you have to experience directly. Okay, so then he says, good and wise friends, all people originally possess the profound knowledge of Bodhi and Prajna within them, but they cannot realize it themselves because their conditioned minds wander and become confused. That is why they must rely on a good and wise advisor who can lead them to see their intrinsic nature. So now he's mapping out sort of the theory here. He's saying that all people, not just Buddhists, and not just awakened people, and not just sages, but all people, originally here means present all along. It doesn't mean in some former time. Okay? So if you think about it, it means originally fundamentally at root, rather than, oh, we had it once upon a time in a golden thing of the past, and now in the present we lost it. That's not what it means. It means it's present all along. They have the profound knowledge within them of bodhi, which means awakened knowledge, and seen in prajna, which is what we just talked about. That is within. It's not outside. It's within the human condition, the human nature. But they cannot realize it themselves. Why? Because their conditioned minds wander and become confused. So this is what we're just describing, not seeing things as they really are, not accepting the facts of existence as they are, either going into denial or into some kind of aversion or to some kind of hedonistic immersion or whatever. That is the conditioned mind wandering. And then we stay in a state of confusion. And that's why he says, in that state, and only in that state, would you need a teacher, a mentor, a good and wise advisor that can lead them to see their intrinsic nature. Now see the difference here. First of all, he's not saying necessarily you need a teacher. If your mind doesn't wander, you don't get confused, you don't need a teacher. Don't bother him or her. Okay? Stand on your own 2 feet. They're more than adequate. But he's saying, if you can't do that, sometimes you need to turn to a mentor. But again, notice the difference here. The mentor is not a savior. The mentor is not someone who delivers you, leads them to see their intrinsic nature. So all the mentor or the sage is doing is causing you to turn back into your own nature to find it and not rely on something external. So, very important. In other words, once that job is done, you leave the teacher, or the teacher kicks you out. But you don't end up having a whole group thing going on forever. So you should know that the Buddha nature, this is another way of describing this intrinsic nature, and Buddha here we use small, meaning the potential for awakening, is fundamentally no different for the foolish or the wise. Wow. Now fundamentally no different means it's the same basic ability or capacity. It's not greater in some people and less in others. The only difference between them is foolish are confused and the wise are awakened. Now that might say, well, that's kind of obvious. But if you think about it, he's saying the only difference is how far you've gone down a road of confusion and how far you've gone away from it. That's the only difference. It's not a fundamental difference. I will now explain the teachings of the great perfection of wisdom for you, so that each of you may become wise. Pay careful attention and listen well as I explain it. And he goes on. And now he's going to hit another dimension. Good and wise friends, people chant prajna all day long without realizing the prajna of their own essential nature. Just as talking about food will not satisfy hunger, so too only talking about emptiness, even for myriad eons, will give you no insight into your own nature. Ultimately, it's of no benefit. So now what he's hinting at is he's associating prajna with emptiness. Remember, I used that before. That was one of the key terms. Seeing the emptiness, the fundamental emptiness of dharmas and self, is the basics for this prajna. And again, the emptiness is the gateway through to the other side, which is that wondrous understanding. So emptiness here is used in connection with prajna. We're going to spend a lot more time on this, so if it doesn't kind of emerge tonight as being clear about this emptiness, we'll take it apart as the weeks go on, because it's, in a sense, especially in the Western context, emptiness denotes a loss, an absence, a vacuity, a failure, incompleteness. What else if I say emptiness? Hollow.
Desolate.
What's that?
Desolate.
Desolate. That's good. Poverty. This is good. Okay. Any? Huh? Loss.
Sad.
Dead. Yeah, that's, huh? Sad. Well, meaningless.
Not full.
Not full. Depressing, dispiriting. Impoverished was a good one in many ways. What else? Emptiness.
Well, there's that expression, the glass half full, so empty's the bad one.
Empty's Empty's bad. That's probably a good summary. So let us say, why would this man who's awakened and is really joyous and happy right now and excited, and why all these people put their palms together and why would they be turned on by all of what we just said? You see? So there's got to be something, the understanding of emptiness that we are missing if we allow those connotations to ride on top of this. Right? For example, for a long time, in the early stages when Buddhism was just becoming known to the West, largely through missionaries, merchants, and some beginning Oriental scholars, they came across this concept, nirvana. And this was seen as the ultimate achievement for a Buddhist was the attainment of nirvana. Okay? And nirvana, as they looked it up in their dictionaries or through a particular biblical lens, let's say, came out as being extinction. And it does partly mean extinction. Nirvana means as if to blow out the flame. And so they concluded, especially the missionaries, that they really had their job cut out for them because they were going to convert people whose goal in life was to enter extinction. And this was really a waste of life and the human soul. And so they got charged up about converting these people sitting in darkness to the way, the truth, and the light, and moving them out of this almost near suicidal death wish that they saw. And this went on for quite a while until one of the scholars, happened to be German, I don't know if there's any connection, one day said, it has just occurred to me that these billions of people who are striving for nirvana do not seem sad, depressed, loners, losers, but actually full of joy and happiness. How could this be? And how could be such people full of life and vibrancy long to be dead forever? It doesn't make sense. So he said, perhaps we have misunderstood the term nirvana. Duh. Yeah, and that was the beginning to understand nirvana was not that, but it was referring to the extinguishing or the dying out of the fires of the passions and afflictions and suffering. It was actually the avidya that's being talked about here, the ending of the delusion that then leads to this wondrous existence, which is associated with permanence, purity, true self, and a bliss that isn't conditioned upon anything else. Okay, so just as that's the case, we have to deal with the same thing with emptiness here. So almost any of these terms that we hear probably need to remember, if they're conveying to us negative emotions and negative ideas, even nihilistic ones, we need to pause and say, we don't have it. Unfortunately, there is no better translation for sunyata that I've come across yet that doesn't, so you have to unpack it and say, what does it mean? The Sixth Patriarch here is going to say emptiness is not only seeing things as they really are, but it's letting go of everything that's false and delusory. It's the unattached, unbound, liberated mind. So the emptiness is, in fact, the letting go of the shackles and the anchors that are keeping you from floating, if you want to say it that way. Okay? So if you're swimming and you have anchors and chains around you, and someone takes those off and empties you of that, do you go, oh my God, it's desolate, impoverished, morbid? No, you can swim and go again. So the emptiness is, in a sense, really important to understand because it's saying if you are implicitly whole and complete and awakened, then anything you put on top of that encumbers that from happening. So the emptying out is the discarding of the impediments and the delusion. And that's why it says true emptiness is just wondrous existence. Because once you're truly empty, there's nothing more obstructing understanding and joy. So this is really, that's why it's rendered via negativa. Okay. Can we finish one more thing here? Okay. Good friends, wise friends, prajnaparamita is a Sanskrit phrase which means great wisdom that goes to the other shore. Meaning it crosses over, it moves you dynamically from one position to another. The other shore is the shore of understanding nirvana. This must be practiced with the mind, not merely recited by the mouth. Oops. Next frame. Verbal repetition without mental cultivation is like a fantasy, a hallucination, like dewdrops in a lightning flash. Now the footnote, you'll note this is in reference to a recurring theme from the Vajra Sutra, where it says all conditioned dharmas. Now remember I said these are the ones you want to doubt? All conditioned dharmas means all the phenomena you encounter in the world. All the things, all your emotions, all your feelings, all your relationships, all your possessions are conditioned dharmas. Oops. They're not called that. They're called investments. They're called treasures. They're called IPOs. But they're just conditioned dharmas. All conditioned dharmas are like dreams, illusions, bubbles, and shadows, like dewdrops and flashes of lightning. Contemplate them in this way, and you will liberate yourself. So he says here, if you just talk about it but don't really do it, then you're like in a fantasy, hallucinating, and so forth. If, however, while the mouth recites, the mind practices, then both mind and mouth are in accord. One's own essential nature is Buddha. Apart from this nature, there's no other Buddha. Whew, I underlined that. Because the first time I read it, I went right over it. One's own essential nature is Buddha. Whoa. It's like, I'm going to the Berkeley Buddhist Monastery, what? To bow to the Buddhas. Oh, and which Buddhas are you bowing to? Well, this Buddha east, this Buddha north, this Buddha south, and then you meet the Sixth Patriarch and says, by the way, there is no other Buddha apart from your nature. Are you bowing to that Buddha? Huh? Whoa, what does that mean? What does it mean? There is no other Buddha apart from your own essential nature. This one's something to think about. And he's not being wishy-washy in saying this. This is very direct. And he's saying, the mouth reciting has to do with people take Prajnaparamita text, the Heart Sutra, the Vajra Sutra, and so forth, and they memorize and recite them, and this is a devotional practice. And he's saying that's all fine and good, but if it doesn't go any further than your mouth, it's useless, and it's not going to bring about any result. It has to be done with the mind at the same time. And now the mind, he means by your being, by your physical body mind. You have to be cultivating this emptiness and not simply talking about it. Let me try to illustrate with an embarrassing example from my own experience. Every morning when I was a novice in training, we would memorize and recite the Heart Sutra. Do any of you know the Heart Sutra? It's quite a quintessential short text that has as its major theme emptiness. And it says, it starts when Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara was contemplating the profound Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom, she illumined, directly saw the five skandhas, saw that they were empty. The five skandhas are what we call the body and mind. She saw they were empty, and she fell into a deep depression. No, I'm just making that up. She saw that they're all empty, and she crossed beyond all suffering and misery, right? Suffering and difficulty. So wait a minute. She saw the emptiness, and she crossed beyond all suffering and difficulty. Wow, how did that work? So then it goes on, and it says, anyhow, I won't recite that. We recite it every morning. And so I thought I had a pretty good grasp on that. And I said, well, if the mind-body thing and all forms are empty and so on and so forth, then I shouldn't grasp and attach to them. I should dwell in this emptiness and not be moved by all these things. So my form of cultivating this was to wrestle internally with my desire to grab and attach to things, and then this principle that there's nothing to grab or attach to, you have to let go of them if you want to be free. So this was the internal struggle that was going on at the time. And so on one occasion, I thought I got pretty good at this because I just stopped. I would bring my eyes down to my nose, kind of look up the tip of my nose when I was taking care of things. And I would stop letting my ears take in too many sounds and control my nose. And when I ate, I tried not to discern the flavors of good or bad and so forth. As you can tell, this is a struggle. But I thought that's what was meant by illuminating things as empty. So Of course, it was wrong, but I didn't know it was wrong. And we were traveling one time, Dharma Master Sher and myself and my teacher, and I don't know where we were. We were at some airport, and we were sitting there, and I was dwelling in emptiness. And the master was talking, so finally he just sort of looked at me and said, Ting, go buy us 3 tickets for wherever we were going. And he took out of his robe a red envelope and gave me the money to go buy the tickets. And of course, although I was dwelling in emptiness, the emptiness of forms and so forth, I did happen to notice when I walked in that the sales clerk behind the counter for this airline was quite an attractive young woman. And so I was dwelling in emptiness. I wasn't going to allow my mind and eyes to go there. And so I thought, oh gosh, I don't want to go over and buy 3 tickets from her. What am I going to do? So I said, no, I'll do it. And I marched over with my eyes still on the tip of my nose. And I put the envelope forward with the money. I said, we want 3 tickets for so-and-so. And she says, oh, okay. What are you? What do you do? I said, we're Buddhist monks. Buddhist monks. You know, cultivating Buddhist monks. Oh, she said, do you want a window seat or an aisle seat? I said, no window, no window. Not going to look out, you know. Okay, and she's like, all right. So she gives me the tickets, gives me the change. I go back, hand them to the teacher, and I think, I did it. And then the master turns to me and said, you got the wrong change here. She cheated you. Really? He says, how can you waste the Triple Jewels money like this? She gave you the wrong change. These tickets, you know, what are you doing? You made a big mistake here. Do you know the karma of wasting the money that comes in? And I'm starting to sweat. I go, oh my gosh. She said, you go back and tell her she cheated you and get your money back. Whoa. And I think, she kind of liked me, boy. This is going to really ruin it. And then I didn't even know how much they cost, so how could I demand my money back? I had no idea. And she said, well, what are you doing? And I can't go back. Why don't you know? Well, I wasn't. You know, I was trying to hang on to my emptiness. Ooh, not the right thing to say. So then he said, "Hang on to your emptiness." Whoa. Your very hanging on to your emptiness shows that you're not empty. What? He said, if you were really empty, you wouldn't be moved by a beautiful form, and you wouldn't have made a mistake in the money or the change. Huh? He says, emptiness is not hanging on, it's letting go. Oh, I don't think I completely understand. He said, and your very not understanding is your confusion. I thought, oh, do you understand? I said, I think a little bit, not completely. And then he said, emptiness means you see through and you let go of, and yet, in the midst of everything, you're completely aware, unattached, alert, and you don't make mistakes. I thought, whoa, I am not at that point yet. And then he said this line, and it's funny because Hung Sure and I have been going over some of our notes from these years. He's in Australia, and we're Skyping. And he said, look at this one. And back then, there's this line that he repeated to us a number of times, both to Hung Sure and myself. And I'm going to give you the line now that he said to me. And it's like 30-some years later, we're going, wow, that's pretty good. Why are we only beginning to grab it now? So then he said, Ting, you should know, in the state of prajna, the eye see forms, but the inside it's nothing. The ears hear the dusty sounds, but the mind does not know. So I thought, and he said, do you get it? And I said, no, I don't get that one. And now Hung Sure found that, and he says, look, I found this. He gave this instruction to me when I was in the kitchen, and it was the same line. And we're both going now 30 to 40 years later, wow. We still haven't completely unpacked it. But I give it as an example of sort of saying this emptiness is something that is completely aware, completely cognizant, seeing things as they really are, not being turned by anything, and it's not coming from repression or denial or force. It's coming because you clearly see there's nothing to grab onto or cling to, And because there's nothing to do, you just let go. And by letting go, the full potential of your possibilities, your creative potential is immeasurably just released at that point. So, that's a embarrassing personal example. And finally he said, it's okay, you don't have to go back. And that to me was a little taste of nirvana. Okay, so that's it for tonight. We'll continue next week going on with this chapter. And any announcements to be made? Nothing? Tomorrow night's Avatamsaka lecture?
Hello.
No, you just shout.
Okay, so
And then that's picked up in
all
Poland.
classes we started. We have new semester, with one exception. On Monday we have Buddhist from the Modern Mind, the first class in this semester.
A little louder.
Tomorrow, on Monday, we have the Buddhist from the Modern Mind. All classes we started, and tomorrow we start with 9 o'clock in the morning. It will be Great Compassion Repentance. 10:30 we have the meal offering and the lunch here in the dining hall. 1 o'clock we have the Buddha's name recitation. 5 o'clock meditation, and 6:30 evening recitation, and Avatamsaka Sutra 7:30. It will come here the nuns from City of the Thousand Buddhas. Just it.
Okay. And if you have any questions that come up, bring them up next week. We'll have more time.
Right now it's the beginning of the semester.
Ah.
You normally will go through some basic guideline about meditation. So do you do that again, or some new faces around here?
So the request is usually at the beginning of the semester we go over some of the basics of sitting meditation. I'm just assuming everybody was familiar with that, but maybe not. Would some of you like next week take maybe 10 or 15 minutes to talk about some of the basics of the sitting meditation practice? How many, just a show of hands, would like to? 1, 2, 3. Is that a hand, or is your sweater too tight? 4 or 5. So a few. We could do it.
So your instruction for meditation from September is uploaded in YouTube videos and then into 3 different sections.
That's funny, because I just got an email from somebody, and she said, I know her, and she said, I'll see you on YouTube. And I thought, what is she talking about? I don't see anybody on YouTube. I don't. So this is what. Okay.
There's a meditation compilation that we put together. So it's actually 3 hours worth of lecture. Right? No, just 1 hour. But spanning 3 lectures. So it's in our YouTube playlist. And you can just go to Dharma Realm Live on the YouTube channel.
Gee, it would have been wonderful if we had YouTube when the Buddha was around.
So that would be a good time to join our mailing list. So then we can email you the lecture. If you have any questions, just come see us later.
That being said, I might just throw a few things in live. I know it's sort of antiquated. So you can look at the YouTube thing, but sometimes when you do it live, different kinds of questions and issues come up that don't come up in, YouTube. So, although I haven't looked at the YouTube, I think I'd be too embarrassed to look at myself talking. But we'll do a little bit at the beginning of the next couple classes just to anchor everybody again. One of the things I've noticed, and even though I've stressed it many times, some people are still closing their eyes when they meditate. And I'm telling you very, very clearly in the instructions and the method, not opening your eyes completely and not closing them completely is a very important component. So if you're into the habit of closing your eyes, you might look at that YouTuber we can talk about again next week, but don't develop this particular bad habit. Because your practice will dead end. If the breathing and the sitting posture is not proper, it's very easy to not really get the the methodology working, and you'll end up being obstructed. So I know that some of you think meditation is closing your eyes, just like I thought hanging on to emptiness was not looking at things. So it's just a head up warning for that. And we can talk about it more next class. By the way, what I'm sharing with the meditation is not something I have come up with. It's only the instructions I've got from my teachers in the past. I'm just passing on what they gave me. But it's important because once you have the foundation, you can practice a lifetime on your own. You really don't need to have classes in it. Okay, so anything else? We're going to do a transference in English, and the idea behind this is to sort of wish or hope or intend that any goodness, insight, understanding that came out of tonight's gathering go out and be shared in a larger world. So this is the chant we do. Those of you who would like it, we do it in English. It's been translated into English. Those of you who would like a copy, Alan's going to maybe pass it around. Just ask, yeah. The melody is simple. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May His boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ding li san bao.